Kindness, when given to the wrong person, is not a gift, but a weapon they use against you. And the silence of one who has endured is not weakness, it is the gathering roar of a coming storm. On a rain-lashed night in New York City, Ilara Hayes stood in the deep shadows of her own hallway, learning this truth in the most brutal way imaginable. The penthouse, a glass palace overlooking the glittering chaos of Central Park, had never felt so cold, so alien. A fire danced in the marble hearth, but its warmth couldn't reach her, couldn't touch the ice that was beginning to form in her veins. She had been searching for a book, a simple, mundane act in a life that was anything but, when the voices reached her. They were whispers, meant to be secret, but the acoustics of the grand, empty home carried them to her like a death sentence. It was her husband, Liam, the self-made billionaire she had lifted from nothing, and her sister, Serena, the woman who shared her blood. They weren't just discussing their affair, a betrayal Ilara's heart had long suspected but refused to see. No, this was something far more sinister. They were speaking of her, using words like fragile and unstable and a danger to herself. They spoke of doctors who had been paid, of documents that had been forged, of a quiet, comfortable facility upstate where she could be taken care of, for her own good. They were calmly, lovingly, plotting the end of her life as she knew it, a strategic move to seize control of her shares, her legacy, her very identity. There were no tears. The shock was too profound for such a simple release. Her heart did not shatter, it solidified, turning into something heavy and cold and unbreakable. The love she held for Liam, the fierce, protective affection she had for Serena, it all evaporated in that single, horrifying moment. It was not replaced by hate, not yet. It was replaced by a terrifying, absolute clarity. The perfect family, the supportive husband, the loving sister. It was all a meticulously crafted stage play. And she, the star of the show, was the only one who didn't know the script. That night, as the storm raged outside, the gentle, trusting Ilara Hayes died a quiet death in the shadows of her own home. And in her place, a strategist was born, her silence no longer a sign of peace, but the patient, calculating calm before a war. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you must first understand the foundation upon which it was built, a foundation Ilara Hayes had laid herself, stone by trusting stone. Her world had once been one of quiet, old-money elegance, a life lived within the ivy-covered walls of a sprawling estate in upstate New York. The Hayes family wasn't loud or flashy. Their wealth was in their name, in their history, in the scent of aged leather and wood smoke that clung to every room. Ilara was a product of that world, educated at the finest schools, taught to value art and literature, and most importantly, to believe in the inherent goodness of people. Her father, a kind man with a poet's soul and a terrible head for business, had raised her on principles of honor and empathy, inadvertently shielding her from the harsh realities of a world that did not play by such gentle rules. By the time he passed, the family fortune was a beautiful, fading tapestry, rich in history but threadbare in substance. Ilara was left with a prestigious name, a sprawling, mortgaged property, and a dwindling trust fund, the last vestiges of a bygone era. Then, Liam walked into her life, and he was the absolute antithesis of everything she had ever known. He didn't come from money. He came from a world of grit and hustle on the rough side of the city. There was a hunger in his eyes, a restless energy that seemed to vibrate in the air around him. When he spoke about his ideas for a tech startup, he didn't just talk about code and algorithms. He painted visions of changing the world, of connecting people in ways no one had ever imagined. He was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly captivating. Ilara, surrounded by the ghosts of her family's gentle decline, was drawn to his fire, to the fierce, undeniable pulse of his ambition. She saw his rough edges not as flaws, but as proof of his authenticity. Their courtship was a whirlwind, a collision of two different Americas. He was fascinated by her grace and her quiet intelligence. She was mesmerized by his drive. They fell in love in cramped coffee shops, sketching out business plans on paper napkins. He made her feel alive, and she, in turn, became his anchor, his muse, and his greatest believer. The memory that would later haunt her, the one that defined the very genesis of their shared life, became known between them as the last dollar story. Liam was on the verge of a breakthrough, a critical meeting with an investor that could change everything, but he was broke. Utterly, humiliatingly broke. He needed to secure a provisional patent, a small but crucial fee that stood between him and his dream. He confessed this to her one night in his tiny apartment, the shame and frustration radiating off him. He was ready to give up. Alara listened, her heart aching for him. Without a word, she opened her laptop, logged into the account for her inheritance, the final, sacred fund, left to her by her father. The balance was painfully small, the last liquid asset to her name. With a steady hand, she transferred every last cent to his account. It wasn't just money. It was the final ghost of her old life, the last piece of her safety net, and she handed it to him without hesitation. "I believe in you more than I believe in this money," she had told him, her voice soft but certain. The gratitude in his eyes that night was blinding. He had held her face in his hands and sworn that he would spend the rest of his life repaying her faith. And for a long time, it seemed he would. Always present, just on the periphery of their perfect love story, was Serena, Alara's younger sister. Growing up, Serena had always been the pragmatic one to Alara's dreamer. She was beautiful, sharp, and possessed a social cunning that Alara lacked. She was a constant presence in their new life, the ever-supportive sister, the loving aunt to their future children they so often spoke of. She championed their relationship from the start, often remarking how Liam was the best thing to ever happen to her sheltered older sister. Yet, looking back, Alara could see the subtle tells. Serena's praise always felt double-edged, her compliments for Alara often followed by a subtle, self-deprecating comment that somehow highlighted her own practicality. When Liam's company took off, Serena was the first person he hired as his executive assistant. It made perfect sense at the time. Who could he trust more? She became indispensable, managing his schedule, his life, becoming the gatekeeper to the new king of the tech world. She would often stay late at the office with Liam, and when Alara would call, Serena would answer, her voice a smooth reassurance, telling Alara not to worry, that they were just finalizing a big deal, and that she would make sure Liam ate something. It was the perfect cover, the perfect position from which to watch, to wait, and to weave her own web. And then there was Eleanor, Liam's mother, a woman as hard and unforgiving as the steel town she came from. From the moment she met Alara, Eleanor made her disdain clear. To her, Alara was not a prize. She was an antique, a fragile relic from a world of privilege that Eleanor despised. She saw Alara's gentle nature as weakness, her quiet support as passivity. At family dinners, Eleanor would laud Liam's achievements as if he had accomplished them in a vacuum, completely ignoring the foundational sacrifice Alara had made. She would direct her questions and her praise almost exclusively to Serena. "Serena, you have such a good head on your shoulders, so practical. You keep my son grounded," she would say, while Alara sat beside her, invisible. Eleanor saw in Serena a reflection of her own tough, unsentimental worldview. She adored Serena's ambition, an ambition that mirrored her son's, and she openly lamented that Liam hadn't met someone more like Alara's sister. This alliance, forged in shared resentment and ambition, became a silent poison in the heart of the family. Eleanor, the resentful matriarch, and Serena, the envious sister, formed a quiet, powerful coalition against the woman they both saw as undeserving. They were the first shareholders in the conspiracy against Alara, long before the plan had even been given a name. And Alara, blinded by love and her own innate trust, saw none of it. She saw only a flawed but loving family, built on a foundation she thought was solid rock, never realizing it was nothing but carefully disguised sand, waiting for the tide to turn. Success, when it finally arrived, was not a gentle wave but a tidal surge, lifting their lives to heights Alara had never imagined. Liam's company, which he named Nexus Dynamics, in a nod to their connection, became a titan of the tech industry. Their cramped apartment was traded for the sprawling penthouse with its panoramic views of the city. Their names were whispered in exclusive restaurants and featured on the glossy pages of magazines. They were the golden couple, a testament to the American dream, his ambition, her faith, a partnership forged in love and a single, final dollar. But inside the gilded cage, the gold was beginning to flake, revealing the cold iron beneath. The vast, open-plan living space of the penthouse, designed for lavish parties, became an echo chamber for Alara's loneliness. Liam was no longer just ambitious, he was consumed. The man who once sketched dreams with her on napkins now spoke a language of mergers, acquisitions, and quarterly earnings that she didn't understand. His physical presence became a rarity, a fleeting visit between a red-eye from Tokyo and a board meeting in London. At first, she accepted it as the price of their new life. She played the role of the perfect, supportive billionaire's wife, hosting charities, managing their flawless home, and waiting. She would prepare his favorite meals, only to eat alone as the food grew cold, a text message arriving hours later. Something came up, don't wait up. The apologies, once heartfelt and detailed, became perfunctory, then non-existent. When he was home, his body was present, but his mind was elsewhere. He was a ghost at their own dinner table, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his phone, his fingers perpetually scrolling, tapping, firing off emails. The easy intimacy they once shared, the late-night talks and shared laughter, evaporated into a tense, sterile silence. When Alara tried to breach the distance, to talk about a book she'd read or a memory from their early days, his responses were clipped, distracted. That's nice, honey. I can't talk about this right now, Alara. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The accusation was always there, unspoken but clear. She was a relic of a simpler time, unable to comprehend the scale of his new world. He made her feel small, her concerns trivial. It was a slow, insidious form of erosion, chipping away at her confidence, making her question her own perceptions. The role of mediator, the bridge across this growing chasm, was eagerly filled by Serena. Her sister was no longer just an assistant. She was Liam's shadow, his gatekeeper, his other half in the empire they were building. Her title had been elevated to chief of staff, her wardrobe was now exclusively designer, and she moved with a sleek, predatory confidence that was a world away from the girl who used to live in Alara's shadow. It was Serena who would call Alara with updates, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Alara, I'm so sorry," she would begin, the preamble to another canceled dinner, another forgotten anniversary. "I tried to drag him out of here, but he's a machine. You know how he is." She positioned herself as Alara's ally, the one person who truly understood, all while tightening her grip on Liam's life. The first definitive crack in Alara's carefully constructed denial appeared on a Tuesday. Liam had been away for a week. He came home one evening, striding into the apartment with a bouquet of expensive but impersonal lilies and a small, elegantly wrapped box from a famous jeweler. Inside was a beautiful but generic diamond bracelet. "Just because," he said, kissing her forehead before his phone buzzed, pulling his attention away once more. Alara wore the bracelet, telling herself it was a sign that he was still trying. A few days later, while gathering his suits for the dry cleaner, a crisp receipt fell from the pocket of his travel blazer. Her eyes scanned the familiar letterhead of the jewelry store. The date matched the day he'd bought her the bracelet. Her bracelet was there on the list, but beneath it was another item, one that made the air freeze in her lungs. The Starlight Sapphire pendant, custom engraving. The price was nearly 5 times that of her bracelet. It was a piece of jewelry she had never seen, never heard of. Her mind scrambled for a rational explanation. A gift for his mother? No, Eleanor didn't wear sapphires. A corporate gift for a client's wife? Perhaps. She folded the receipt, her fingers trembling slightly, and tucked it away in her jewelry box, a cold, hard piece of evidence for a crime she wasn't ready to name. After that, she started to notice other things, small inconsistencies that her mind could no longer explain away. She noticed the way Liam would walk out onto the terrace to take certain calls, his back to the glass walls, his voice a low, intimate murmur that was starkly different from his sharp, professional tone. If she happened to slide the door open, he would startle, his voice instantly changing, his words becoming loud and businesslike before he ended the call abruptly. Just a sensitive negotiation, he'd say, avoiding her eyes. Then there were the shared glances. At a charity gala, Alara was telling an amusing story about their early, struggling days to a group of friends. In the middle of a sentence, she looked across the table and saw it. Liam and Serena were looking not at her, but at each other. It was a fleeting, instantaneous exchange, but it was filled with a universe of meaning, shared history, private jokes, and something that looked unnervingly like pity. They were on the inside of a joke, and the punchline, she suddenly realized, was her. The final, undeniable proof came through the most primal of senses: smell. Liam came home late one night, long after she had gone to bed. He slid under the covers, thinking she was asleep. He smelled of the cold night air, of expensive whiskey, and of something else. A faint, sweet, floral scent. It was La Pearl, the exclusive and incredibly expensive perfume Serena had recently declared her new signature. Alara lay there, perfectly still, her eyes wide open in the darkness. The scent was on his skin, in his hair. He brought the smell of her sister into their marital bed. The cracks were no longer hairline fractures. They were gaping wounds in the foundation of her life, and Alara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that if she looked into them, she would see a darkness that would swallow her whole. The final, fragile thread of Alara's denial was severed by a single, careless lie. Liam was meant to be in a late-night negotiation with the board of a German tech firm, a critical all-hands-on-deck emergency meeting. He had called her, his voice strained with manufactured stress, telling her it would likely go on until dawn. An hour later, scrolling numbly through her social media feed, Alara saw a photo posted by the wife of that company's CEO. It showed him, Liam's supposed negotiating partner, smiling broadly at a family barbecue in the Hamptons, a beer in his hand, the sun still high in the sky. The photo was time-stamped from that very afternoon. The lie was so blatant, so lazy, it was an insult to her intelligence. It was the contempt, more than the deceit, that finally galvanized her. He didn't even care enough to craft a believable fiction. In that moment, the vague, shapeless dread that had been her constant companion coalesced into a sharp, urgent need for the truth, no matter how ugly. She waited until the following day, a day she knew Liam would be in back-to-back meetings downtown, and Serena, conveniently, would be with him. The penthouse was empty, the staff given the day off. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic pounding of her own heart. She walked to his private study, a room that had always been his exclusive domain, a sanctuary of dark mahogany and brushed steel where she was an unwelcome guest. The air inside was still, smelling faintly of his expensive cologne and the leather of the law books that lined the shelves books, she now realized, that were likely teaching him how to destroy her. Her target was a large, ornate oak panel behind his desk, one that always seemed slightly too perfect, too seamless. Her fingers, shaking but determined, traced its edges until she found the hidden magnetic latch. With a soft click, the panel swung open, revealing the cold, gray face of a biometric safe. For a moment, her heart sank. She could never get in, but then she noticed the small, secondary keypad just below the fingerprint scanner. The emergency override. She thought of the numbers that had defined their life together. Their wedding anniversary? Too obvious. His birthday? Too egocentric. Then, a wave of bitter irony washed over her. She keyed in the 8 digits of the date she had transferred him her last dollar, the date he swore he would never forget. A green light flickered, and with a heavy thud, the lock disengaged. The contents of the safe were layered like a geological dig through the history of his deceit. On the top layer were impersonal financial documents, statements for offshore accounts and deeds for shell corporations under names she had never heard. It was evidence of financial infidelity, cold and corporate. Beneath that, the betrayal became painfully personal. A soft, velvet pouch held the starlight sapphire pendant. Seeing it, feeling its cold, heavy weight in her hand, made the affair viscerally real. Tucked beside it was a slim envelope containing a handful of photographs. Not salacious pictures, but something far worse. They were candid shots of Liam and Serena on his latest business trip to Italy. They were laughing on a balcony overlooking Lake Como, sharing a gelato in a sun-drenched piazza, his arms slung possessively around her shoulder. They looked like a happy, carefree couple in love. A wave of nausea hit Alara so hard she had to brace herself against the desk. She had looked at these same photos on Serena's social media feed, only Alara had been cropped out of the narrative. Serena had told her Liam was too busy with meetings to even step outside. But the deepest layer of hell was at the very bottom, inside a thick, unmarked leather portfolio. She slid it out, her hands strangely steady now, a cold calm descending upon her. The first page was a cover sheet with her name typed in stark, black letters. Psychological evaluation, Hayes, Ilara. For the next 20 minutes, Alara read a meticulously crafted fiction of her own life. It was all there, every vulnerability she had ever shown him, twisted into a symptom of madness. Her quiet grief after her father's death was pathologized as chronic depressive episodes. Her artistic, contemplative nature was reframed as dissociative tendencies and social withdrawal. Innocent moments of forgetfulness were logged as evidence of cognitive decline. The document was filled with detailed, fabricated anecdotes of her supposed erratic behavior, her paranoia, her emotional instability, lies clearly fed to the psychiatrist by Liam and Aver, she saw with a fresh stab of pain, by her own sister. The final page contained the diagnosis, a devastating label designed to strip her of all credibility. Progressive delusional disorder, exacerbated by narcissistic injury. It was signed by a doctor, Alistair Finch, a man she had never met. His signature, a confident, damning scrawl. But that wasn't all. Tucked behind the evaluation were legal documents, drafts carefully prepared by a team of ruthless lawyers, a petition to the court for an emergency conservatorship, a sworn affidavit from Serena, attesting to her sister's frightening decline and her inability to manage her own affairs. And finally, a proposed order that would grant Liam temporary and eventually permanent legal authority over Alara's entire life, her finances, her medical decisions, and even her personal freedom. It was a bloodless coup, a meticulously planned execution of her identity. They weren't just trying to leave her, they were trying to erase her. They were going to have her declared insane, lock her away, and seize everything her family had ever built, everything she had ever owned, all under the guise of loving concern. Ilara sank to the floor, the thick carpet doing nothing to soften the blow. The portfolio lay open in her lap. The tears she expected did not come. The heartbreak over the affair felt like a distant, trivial wound compared to this. This was not a crime of passion. This was a cold, calculated, predatory act of annihilation. The terror that had gripped her moments before was burned away in a sudden, clarifying fire. The love, the grief, the hurt, it all combusted, leaving behind not ash, but something hard and pure and indestructible. It was rage, a rage so profound and so quiet, it felt like serenity. She sat there for a long time, the first rays of dawn beginning to streak the sky, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the silent room. Then, with methodical precision, she rose. She took out her phone and photographed every single page, every document, every signature. She placed the photos of Liam and Serena back in their envelope. She nested the sapphire back in its velvet pouch. She reassembled the portfolio of lies exactly as she had found it. She placed everything back inside the safe, closed the heavy door, and spun the dial, the soft click sealing her old life away for good. As she walked out of the study and into the morning light, she was no longer a heartbroken wife. She was an adversary in a war she had not started, but one she was now fully prepared to win. The woman who greeted Liam and Serena when they returned that evening was not the woman who had opened the safe that morning. The strategist born in the cold light of dawn was now hidden behind a carefully constructed mask of the woman they expected to see. Outwardly, Ilara was pale, her movements languid, her eyes holding a distant, troubled look. When Liam, in a perfunctory display of concern, asked how her day had been, she hesitated, looking genuinely confused for a moment. It was quiet, she said, her voice a little breathy. To be honest, I felt a bit scattered. I had a lunch appointment with an old friend, and I completely forgot about it until she called asking where I was. It was so embarrassing. She watched as a quick, almost imperceptible glance was exchanged between her husband and her sister. It was a look of confirmation, of satisfaction. Their plan was working. Her performance had begun. From that day forward, Ilara inhabited the role they had written for her with the dedication of a seasoned actress. She became a creature of fragility and distraction. She would leave a pot boiling on the stove until the smell of smoke filled the kitchen, feigning shock and confusion when Serena rushed in to turn it off. She would misplace her keys, her phone, her reading glasses, creating small, daily dramas where she was the helpless victim and they were the capable, if impatient, saviors. "Oh, Ilara, it's in your hand," Liam would say, his voice thick with condescension, as she looked frantically for the phone she was holding. She weaponized their perception of her weakness, turning it into the perfect camouflage. She began to pepper her conversation with hints of the paranoia they had invented for her. While watching the news, she would make an anxious comment about data security, asking Liam in a hushed tone, "Do you ever feel like the walls are listening?" She would complain of headaches and sleepless nights, allowing them to see her looking exhausted and frail in the mornings. Each sigh, each moment of feigned confusion, each forgotten appointment was a carefully placed brushstroke on the portrait of a woman losing her mind. A portrait they were eager to believe. Their arrogance became her greatest shield. Convinced of her mental decline and absorbed in their own brilliance, they grew careless. They saw her, but they no longer truly saw her. The quiet, artistic wife wandering through the penthouse was just part of the scenery, a ghost in her own home, and they never once suspected that the ghost was watching, listening, and recording. While they were away, running their empire and celebrating their secret victory, the fragile Ilara vanished. A new woman took her place, one with a singular, ice-cold purpose. She became an intelligence operative in a war of one. Using a prepaid credit card and a newly created anonymous email address, she ordered a suite of surveillance equipment. Miniature audio recorders the size of a thumbnail, a powerful keystroke logging software, and a tiny, magnetic GPS tracker. The items were delivered not to the penthouse, but to a private mailbox she rented under a false name miles away. In the dead of night, sitting in her private study, she devoured online tutorials, learning the craft of espionage with a feverish intensity. The deployment of her arsenal was a series of high-stakes, heart-pounding operations. One afternoon, while Liam was in a long shower, she slipped into his study. With trembling hands and a silent prayer, she affixed a micro-recorder under the heavy mahogany desk, a place no cleaning crew would ever find. A few days later, feigning a dizzy spell, she asked Serena to fetch her a glass of water from the kitchen. In the 90 seconds she was alone, she plugged a tiny USB drive containing the keylogger into Liam's laptop, her ears straining for the sound of Serena's returning footsteps. The software installed in seconds, invisible and undetectable. The GPS tracker was the riskiest. She stitched it into the inner lining of the leather briefcase Serena always carried, a gift from Liam that she never went anywhere without. Each successful placement was a small victory, fueling her resolve. Her nights transformed. After feigning sleep, she would slip away to her sitting room, the one corner of the house that was truly hers. There, with a new encrypted laptop, she would download the day's harvest. She listened to hours of audio, her face impassive. She heard Liam and Serena discussing business strategy, but she also heard them laughing about her latest episode of forgetfulness. She heard them whispering endearments to each other, their words a poison dagger in the quiet of the night. The keylogger captured every password, every email, every private message. She saw their secret plans to divert company funds, their contemptuous messages about business partners, and most damningly, their correspondence with Dr. Alistair Finch, scheduling her next evaluation. The pain of it was immense, a constant, dull ache in her chest. But with every lie she uncovered, every secret she documented, her sorrow was calcified, layer by layer, into something harder, stronger. It was the raw material for her revenge. She knew, however, that she couldn't dismantle an empire alone. She needed an ally, someone with the legal firepower and the institutional knowledge she lacked. She needed Arthur Vance. Arthur had been her father's lawyer and closest friend, a man of unwavering integrity who had been unceremoniously fired by Liam years ago for being too old-fashioned. Liam's mistake was in seeing Arthur's loyalty to the past as a weakness, not as the unshakable force it truly was. Contacting him was a risk. Every move she made was a risk. She bought a cheap burner phone with cash from a corner store. On a gray afternoon, she took the subway to a part of the city she never frequented, pulling the hood of her coat up to obscure her face. She found a quiet bench in a small, forgotten park and dialed the number she had found in an old legal directory. An older, gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "Vance, Mr. Vance," Alara began, her own voice sounding strange and distant to her ears. "My name is Alara Hayes. I'm Richard Hayes's daughter." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the silence thick with memory and respect. "Alara," he said, his tone softening instantly. "It has been a long time. I was so sorry to hear about your father." "Thank you, Arthur," she said, allowing herself a flicker of genuine warmth. "The reason I'm calling, I need to speak with you about a confidential matter. It concerns my father's estate and certain irregularities in the current governance of Nexus Dynamics." She chose her words with surgical precision. She didn't mention the affair, the betrayal, or the medical conspiracy. She spoke his language. Estates, governance, irregularities. She heard him take a slow breath. He was sharp, and he could read between the lines of her caution. He knew this wasn't a simple legal question. "I see," he said, his voice now low and serious. "I think a face-to-face meeting would be appropriate. Not at your home, and not at my office." He gave her the address of a small, dusty law library in the financial district for the following day, a place so archaic and offline that no one would ever think to look for them there. As she ended the call and removed the battery from the burner phone, a profound sense of shift settled over her. The storm that had been gathering in the silent corners of her soul was no longer just her own. It was about to make landfall, and she had just recruited its first general. The war had begun. The law library was a sanctuary of silence and dust, a forgotten crypt in the heart of the gleaming financial district. Alara, dressed in a simple trench coat and a hat pulled low over her face, slipped through the heavy oak doors, leaving the frantic energy of the city behind. The air inside was thick with the scent of decaying paper and old leather, a place anachronistic and invisible to the modern world of digital surveillance and social media. In a secluded alcove, surrounded by towering shelves of forgotten legal texts, Arthur Vance was waiting. He was older than she remembered, his hair now a shock of distinguished white, but his eyes, behind a pair of simple, wire-rimmed glasses, were as sharp and clear as ever. He rose as she approached, his posture straight and dignified, and took her hand in a firm, warm grip. "Alara," he said, his gravelly voice filled with a genuine, sorrowful respect. "You look so much like your father." For a moment, the strategist in her faltered, and she was simply the daughter of a man he had loved. But the moment passed. She was here for a war, not a wake. They sat at a heavy wooden table, a small island in a sea of shadows. Without preamble, Alara opened her encrypted laptop. "Arthur," she began, her voice low and steady, "what I'm about to show you is deeply disturbing. I need you to look at this not as a family friend, but as the best lawyer in this city." She laid out the evidence with the cold precision of a prosecutor. She started with the superficial wounds, the photos of Liam and Serena, their casual intimacy a stark betrayal. She showed him the jeweler's receipt, the physical proof of the secret necklace. Arthur watched, his expression grim, his jaw tight with a quiet anger on her behalf. Then she opened the next set of files, and the atmosphere in the room changed, growing colder, heavier. She showed him the fabricated psychological evaluation, the carefully constructed narrative of her descent into madness. She pointed to the sworn affidavit from Serena, her own sister's signature on a document designed to condemn her. Finally, she displayed the draft of the legal petition, the one that would have seen her stripped of her autonomy and locked away. As Arthur read, his professional calm began to crack. She saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped the edge of the table. He took off his glasses, rubbing his eyes as if to wipe away the ugliness of the words on the screen. He had seen the worst of humanity in his long career: greed, corruption, deceit. But this was different. This was a level of cold-blooded, intimate cruelty that sickened him to his core. To do this to anyone was monstrous. To do it to Richard Hayes's daughter was an unforgivable sacrilege. "The boy was always ambitious," Arthur finally said, his voice a low growl. "But I never imagined this. This is evil." Alara simply nodded, letting the weight of his words settle. "This is why I came to you," she said. "They believe I am a fragile, broken doll they can simply put away on a shelf. I need to know what my options are." Arthur put his glasses back on, and when he looked at her, the sympathetic friend was gone, replaced by the formidable legal mind her father had so admired. "Your options," he said, a dangerous glint in his eye, "are far better than you think, because you are not the only one who has been watching him." He then opened his own worn leather briefcase. He explained that Liam's eagerness to push him out of the company years ago had been a red flag. His loyalty to her father compelled him to keep a watchful, distant eye on the legacy he had helped protect. Using old contacts within the financial industry and his encyclopedic knowledge of corporate law, Arthur had been quietly tracing the flow of money out of Nexus Dynamics for years. He presented her with his own set of documents, complex flowcharts that tracked money through a labyrinth of shell corporations in Panama and the Cayman Islands, evidence of systematic embezzlement that dwarfed anything Alara had suspected. Liam wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a world-class financial criminal, stealing millions from his own shareholders, from the very company she had helped him build. "He's been bleeding the company dry to fund a lifestyle even his salary can't support," Arthur explained. "He's a fraud, Alara, through and through." The revelation was staggering, but it was nothing compared to what came next. Arthur leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Your father was a good man," he said. "He was a poet and a dreamer, but he was not a fool. He saw the ruthlessness in Liam, even back then. He admired his drive, but he was afraid of what that drive might do to you." He told her that in the final weeks of his life, her father had called him for one last, secret meeting. He was worried, possessed by a premonition he couldn't shake. And so, they had drafted a document, a final, secret layer of protection for his only child. Arthur reached deep into his briefcase and pulled out a heavy, cream-colored envelope, sealed with the wax emblem of her father's signet ring. It was a secret codicil to the will, a legal document so powerful, so explosive, it was a weapon of mutually assured destruction. Arthur slid it across the table. With trembling fingers, Alara broke the seal. The legal language was dense, but the core clause was written with devastating clarity. It stated that in the event Liam was ever proven to have committed marital infidelity or to have willfully engaged in any action intended to cause Alara Hayes significant personal, financial, or emotional harm, all assets, shares, and controlling interests in Nexus Dynamics that he had acquired through his marriage to her would be immediately and irrevocably rendered void. Everything would revert to her sole, undisputed ownership. It was a dead man's switch, a poison pill. Her father, from beyond the grave, had just handed her a loaded gun. Alara looked up from the document, her breath catching in her throat. The pieces of the puzzle were no longer scattered. They were assembled, forming a clear, terrifying, and exhilarating picture. Her evidence of the conspiracy, Arthur's evidence of the financial fraud, and her father's secret will. It was a three-pronged attack that could not only expose Liam, but utterly annihilate him, stripping him of his wealth, his reputation, and his freedom in a single, decisive blow. "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice filled with a newfound strength. Arthur allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Now," he said, "we do nothing. We let him continue to believe he is the smartest man in the room. We let him walk deeper into his own trap. We will gather more evidence, make our case not just strong but airtight. And then, we choose our moment. We will not just expose him, Alara. We will create a stage, and on that stage, he will be the architect of his own destruction." Alara slid the codicil back into its envelope. Leaving the law library, she stepped back into the bright, chaotic afternoon. The city no longer felt threatening. The weight of her secret was still immense, but it was no longer the soul-crushing burden of a victim. It was the empowering, tactical weight of a hidden arsenal. She was no longer a woman alone in the dark. She was a general, with an army of two, preparing for the battle of her life. With their secret alliance forged, Alara and Arthur Vance agreed on the most difficult strategy of all: patience. The waiting, Alara would later reflect, was the hardest part of the war. Her penthouse, once a symbol of success, transformed into the true gilded cage of its name. It was her prison, her observation post, and the stage for the final act of her marriage. Emboldened by her convincing performance of a woman unraveling, Liam and Serena shed the last of their inhibitions. Their cruelty, once cloaked in concern, now walked about naked and brazen. They were no longer just conspirators. They were zookeepers, and she was their prized, pathetic exhibit. Their affair became an open secret within the soundproofed walls of the apartment. They would share inside jokes at the dinner table, their laughter echoing in the cavernous room while Alara pushed food around her plate. Serena took to wearing the starlight sapphire pendant openly, its brilliant blue stone, a constant, flashing reminder of the lie. When Alara once feigned a moment of confused admiration, touching the necklace and murmuring, "That's so lovely, Serena. Is it new?" Serena had smiled, a slow, venomous smile, and glanced at Liam. "It was a gift," she said, her voice dripping with meaning, "from someone who truly appreciates me." Their campaign of psychological warfare escalated, becoming a daily, insidious assault designed to make her question the very foundations of her reality. This gaslighting was their most vicious tool. They started small, moving objects in her private rooms. A silver-backed hairbrush she always kept on the left side of her vanity would appear on the right. A book she was halfway through, left on her nightstand, would be found reshelved in the library. When she would mention it, a look of profound, pitying worry would cross Liam's face. "Honey, it's been there all morning," he would say, his voice a perfect imitation of gentle reasoning. "You were reading it in the library just after breakfast, remember?" He would create a memory for her, a plausible fiction, and her feigned confusion and eventual, weary agreement only confirmed their diagnosis. They invented conversations and appointments, weaving a false reality around her. Serena was the master of this particular cruelty. "Don't forget we have the fitting for your dress for the museum gala tomorrow at 3, she'd say brightly. Alara, knowing full well the gala was months away and no fitting was scheduled, would play her part. "Oh, did we? I don't seem to have it in my calendar." Serena's face would fall into an expression of deep concern. She would place a comforting hand on Alara's arm. "Alara, we spent 20 minutes on the phone with the designer yesterday. You chose the silk swatch yourself. Are you sure you're feeling all right?" Every day was a walk through a funhouse of distorting mirrors, and the sheer effort of pretending to be lost, of pretending to believe their lies, was an agonizing drain on her spirit. The final member of their cruel triumvirate, Eleanor, began to visit more frequently, her presence like a blast of Arctic air. She would sweep into the penthouse, her sharp eyes missing nothing, her mouth a permanent slash of disapproval. She dispensed with all pretense of affection for Alara, treating her with an open, withering contempt. She would sit in Alara's own living room, holding court, while Serena served her tea. "You must be so exhausted, Liam," Eleanor would say, pointedly ignoring Alara, who was sitting right there. "Running this empire, and having to manage everything at home. It's a miracle you're still standing. A man needs a partner who is a fortress, not a sandcastle." During one particularly brutal visit, Eleanor turned her gaze directly on Alara, her eyes like chips of ice. "You know, when Richard was alive, he worried about you," she said, twisting the knife of Alara's own grief. "He said you had a delicate constitution. It seems his worries were well-founded. You're lucky to have Liam and Serena to look after you." Each word was a calculated blow, designed to isolate and demoralize her. Alara absorbed it all, her face a mask of placid sorrow, her eyes downcast. She let them see the fragile woman her father had worried about, never letting them see the daughter who had inherited his hidden strength. This period was Alara's emotional crucible. The constant performance was exhausting. There were nights she would lie awake, the echoes of their lies and insults ringing in her ears, and for a terrifying moment, she would feel the edges of her own certainty begin to blur. Did she move the hairbrush? Did she forget that appointment? Their assault was so relentless, so unified, that she had to retreat to her study late at night, open the encrypted files on her laptop, and look at the cold, hard proof of their conspiracy just to anchor herself back to reality. The recordings, the legal documents, the secret codicil, these were her touchstones, the talismans that kept her sane. The loneliness was a physical weight, a constant pressure on her chest. She was surrounded by the people who should have been her closest family, yet she had never been more alone. But the cage, for all its cruelty, was also a forge. Every condescending pat on the hand from Liam, every pitying sigh from Serena, every venomous word from Eleanor, they were not breaking her, they were tempering her. Her sorrow was burning away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated resolve. The pain was immense, but she learned to metabolize it, turning every ounce of humiliation and heartbreak into fuel for the coming reckoning. She was learning to endure the unendurable, to smile while planning a demolition. They thought they were breaking a fragile doll, but they were unknowingly sharpening a diamond-hard blade. Late one evening, she stood before the vast, floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room, looking out at the glittering city lights. She saw her reflection in the dark glass, a pale, haunted-looking woman, the perfect image of their victim. But she held her own gaze, looking past the reflection, into the eyes of the woman she was becoming. That woman was not haunted, she was hunting. The cage was locked, the guards were laughing, but they had made a fatal error. They had forgotten that a gilded cage is still a cage, and every prisoner dreams of nothing but the day they will be free. The time for patient endurance was over. The catalyst for action came not as a roar, but as a whisper, overheard on a recording from Liam's study. It was his voice, low and confident, on the phone with Dr. Alistair Finch. "Next week," Liam said, his tone casual, as if discussing a dinner reservation. "The day after the shareholder meeting. We'll have the court order by then. Just make sure your people are discreet when they arrive." The words struck Alara not with fear, but with the cold, clear chime of a deadline. The game had a clock, and it was about to run out. That night, she met Arthur Vance in a rented, anonymous office suite downtown, a sterile space of gray carpets and fluorescent lighting that held no ghosts of the past. She played him the recording. The grim set of his jaw told her everything she needed to know. "The annual shareholder meeting," Arthur stated, "more as a confirmation than a question. It's his coronation. He'll be announcing the successful acquisition of a rival tech firm, a move that will make him the undisputed king of the industry." Alara nodded, her mind already working, seeing the chessboard with perfect clarity. "A coronation is the perfect stage for an abdication," she said, a chill in her voice. "He wants a celebration of his power. We will give him a spectacle of his downfall, and I know exactly how to set the stage." The next evening, Alara approached Liam as he was loosening his tie after a long day. She wore the mask of her fragility perfectly, her hands fidgeting slightly, her eyes wide and earnest. "Liam," she began, her voice soft and hesitant, "I've been thinking about the shareholder meeting. It's such a huge moment for you, for the company. I want it to be perfect." He looked at her, a flicker of impatience in his eyes, but her next words caught his full attention. "I was thinking, we should do something more than just show financial charts. We should show them your journey. I could work with the media team, put together a short video presentation, a tribute to the man who built all of this." She watched the hook sink deep. His ego, vast and insatiable, devoured the bait whole. The idea of a public tribute, orchestrated by his devoted, adoring wife, was irresistible. It would be the crowning jewel of his narrative, the brilliant titan of industry, supported by his loving, if simple, spouse. "That's a wonderful idea, Alara," he said, his voice smoothing into a warm, patronizing tone. He placed a hand on her cheek. "I'd like that very much." With the trap laid, It was time to make sure the prey walked into it without an ounce of suspicion. A few nights before the meeting, she arranged an intimate family dinner. Only Liam, Serena, and Eleanor were present. The mood in the dining room was deceptively light. They were on the cusp of their ultimate victory, and their relief made them expansive, almost giddy. They humored Alara, letting her talk about the tribute video, their smiles full of condescension and private amusement. Then, as the main course was cleared, Alara set her final snare. She took a shaky breath, her eyes welling with expertly crafted tears. "Liam, Eleanor, Serena," she started, her voice trembling. "I need to tell you something." She looked down at her hands, the picture of a broken woman. "I know I haven't been, well, I've been confused and scared, and I haven't been fair to any of you." She looked up, first at Liam. "You've built this incredible world, and all I've been is a source of worry." Then at Serena, "You've worked so hard to help, and I've been difficult." She finally paused, taking another shuddering breath. "You were right, all of you. I need help, real help." The air in the room grew still, charged with their silent, rapt attention. "So," she concluded, the tears now tracking down her cheeks, "after the shareholder meeting, after we have this one last wonderful celebration of everything you've accomplished, Liam, I'll go. I'll go to that facility Dr. Finch recommended. I'll get the rest you've all said I need. I'm ready." The effect was instantaneous. A wave of triumphant relief washed over them, so powerful it was almost a physical presence in the room. Serena rushed to her side, enveloping her in a treacherous hug, whispering, "Oh, Alara, you are so brave. This is the best thing for you." Eleanor gave a rare, tight-lipped smile of approval. "It's about time you saw reason, child," she said. The words meant to sound like tough love, but landing like a verdict. Liam knelt beside her chair, taking her hand in his. His face was a perfect mask of husbandly concern, but she could see the cold, victorious glint in his eyes. "I am so proud of you," he said, his voice thick with false emotion. "This is a new beginning for all of us." They had no idea that a tiny microphone, hidden in the floral centerpiece, was broadcasting every single one of their gentle, caring, monstrous words to a secure server, creating a permanent record of their final, fatal act of manipulation. In the final 48 hours before the meeting, the true work began. Alara's penthouse became a silent, efficient command center. While her enemies slept, convinced of their impending victory, she worked. She was in constant, encrypted contact with Arthur. He was her general in the field, preparing legal injunctions to freeze Liam's personal and corporate assets, compiling his own forensic accounting reports, and holding discreet, off-the-record meetings with two senior board members who had been loyal to her father and were deeply unnerved by Liam's increasingly autocratic behavior. They were ready to act as soon as the first blow was struck. Alara's task was to craft the weapon. The tribute video he was expecting was, in reality, a meticulously constructed presentation. She titled it, "Nexus Dynamics, A Legacy of Truth." Using the audio from her recorders, the emails from the keylogger, and the documents from his safe, she wove together a devastating timeline of his deceit. Slide after slide was a nail in his coffin, an audio clip of him and Serena mocking her, overlaid with a photo of her own smiling face from their wedding day. A side-by-side comparison of a legitimate company expense and the wire transfer to one of his shell corporations. A high-resolution scan of Dr. Finch's fraudulent diagnosis, followed by a copy of his suspended medical license from another state that Arthur's investigator had uncovered. It was a masterpiece of righteous fury, presented with the cold, irrefutable logic of a legal brief. She slept for only an hour or two at a time, fueled by coffee and a resolve that had been forged in the fires of her humiliation. The fear and pain were gone, burned away. All that remained was a profound and unnerving calm. On the morning of the meeting, she rose before the Sunday. She showered and selected her outfit with the care of a warrior choosing their armor, a simple, elegant sheath dress in a deep charcoal gray. It was professional, understated, and offered no hint of the emotional turmoil of the woman they thought she was. As she applied a touch of makeup, she looked at her reflection. The face that stared back was her own, but the eyes were different. They were ancient, filled with the quiet, absolute certainty of a force of nature. A storm about to break, a debt about to be collected. From the other room, she heard Liam humming, the cheerful, carefree sound of a man who believed he was king of the world, walking to his own coronation. "Ilara, are you ready?" he called out, his voice buoyant. "The car is waiting. It's going to be a big day." She took one last look in the mirror, her expression unreadable. "Yes, darling," she called back, her voice perfectly even. "I'm ready. I wouldn't miss it for the world." The ballroom of the Grand Sheraton Hotel was a cathedral of modern capitalism. 3,000 square feet of shimmering crystal chandeliers, plush navy carpeting, and the low, expectant hum of power. This was Liam's church, and today was his ascension. When they arrived, a phalanx of photographers and reporters surged forward, their camera flashes creating a strobing, disorienting wall of light. Liam thrived in it, a shark in his native waters. He waved, smiled his perfectly calibrated, charismatic smile, and placed a proprietary hand on the small of Ilara's back, guiding her through the chaos. She moved with a serene, almost liquid grace, a stark contrast to the frenzy around them. Her calm was misinterpreted by everyone who saw it. They saw the quiet, subdued wife, the elegant but fragile accessory to greatness. They had no idea they were looking at the eye of a hurricane. Serena was waiting for them inside, a vision of corporate efficiency in a razor-sharp power suit, a tablet clutched in her hand. She greeted Liam with a look of pure, triumphant adoration, a look that conveniently slid past Ilara as if she were made of glass. "Everything is ready," Serena murmured to him, her voice a low thrum of excitement. "The press are here. The board is in the front row. It's perfect." Liam squeezed her shoulder in a gesture that was far too intimate for a boss and his chief of staff, and together the three of them made their way to the front of the cavernous room. Ilara took her designated seat, a throne of honor and humiliation in the very first row. Beside her, Eleanor sat ramrod straight, her expression a mixture of fierce maternal pride and smug satisfaction. Ilara's gaze swept across the room, not with the dazed confusion of a woman out of her element, but with the sharp, analytical focus of a battlefield commander. She saw it all. The bored, powerful faces of the board of directors, men whose loyalty was to the bottom line and nothing more. She saw the eager, hungry journalists, pens poised, ready to write the gospel of Liam Hayes' success. And scattered amongst the sea of expensive suits, she saw them. The two quiet, unassuming individuals from the Securities and Exchange Commission, whom Arthur had anonymously tipped off about a major corporate announcement, now posing as low-level investors. Her pieces were all in place. Eleanor leaned in, her perfume sharp and cloying. "Do try to look engaged, dear," she whispered, her voice a serrated edge. "This is the most important day of Liam's life. Don't detract from it with one of your moods." Ilara didn't turn. She simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes fixed on the brightly lit, empty stage. Her stillness was a form of defiance, so profound, so alien to Eleanor's world of emotional theatrics, that the older woman recoiled slightly, unsettled. Then, the lights dimmed, a hush fell over the crowd, and a deep, sonorous voice announced his name. Liam strode onto the stage to a deafening roar of applause. He was a master showman, and he soaked in the adoration, his arms spread wide, a benevolent king accepting the worship of his subjects. He looked magnificent, a titan in a bespoke Tom Ford suit, radiating an aura of absolute, unshakable confidence. He began his speech, his voice resonating with power and passion through the state-of-the-art sound system. He spoke of vision, of relentless innovation, of the courage to disrupt. He painted a picture of Nexus Dynamics, not as a company, but as a force for global change, and himself as its humble, guiding visionary. He announced the quarterly profits, numbers so astronomical that a fresh wave of applause rippled through the audience. He detailed the strategic brilliance of his latest acquisition, a move the Wall Street Journal had called a checkmate in the tech industry's great game. He was charming, he was brilliant, He was utterly believable. He was the author of a masterpiece of fiction, and he was his own most ardent reader. Elara listened to the lies, each one a familiar note in a symphony of deceit she now knew by heart. She felt nothing, no anger, no pain, only a profound, chilling sense of detachment, the quiet focus of an executioner waiting for the condemned to finish his final prayer. Finally, he reached the crescendo, the part of the performance designed to cement his image as not just a great leader, but a good man. He paused, letting the applause for his business triumphs fade. He adopted a look of humble sincerity, his gaze sweeping the room before landing, with practiced tenderness, on Elara. "Success is not a solitary journey," he said, his voice dropping into an intimate, almost reverent tone. "And I would be nothing without the support of the people who believe in me. Most of all, I need to thank my beautiful wife, Elara." A camera zoomed in on her, her impassive face appearing on the two massive screens flanking the stage. The entire room turned to look at her. "Many of you know," Liam continued, his voice now laced with a carefully measured note of pathos, "that my wife values her privacy. She is a woman of quiet, profound strength. And in the face of her own personal health challenges, she has remained my greatest source of emotional support, my truest believer." It was the masterstroke of his cruelty, a public anointing that was, in reality, a public branding. He was telling the world, in the most gallant way possible, that she was unwell. He was cementing his narrative, garnering sympathy, and dismissing her in a single, benevolent gesture. "So thank you, my love," he finished, looking directly at her, his eyes shining with false tears. "Thank you for being my rock. This victory is as much yours as it is mine." The ballroom erupted in a wave of heartfelt, sympathetic applause. They were clapping for the great man's magnanimity, for his loyalty to his troubled, fragile wife. Liam stood there, basking in the warm glow of their admiration, his chest swelling with pride. He had reached the summit. He was untouchable, invincible. From her seat, Elara did not smile, nor did she weep. She simply held his gaze, and with a slow, deliberate grace that no one could quite interpret, she nodded. It was a nod of acknowledgement, of acceptance, the nod of a duelist, accepting the terms of combat just before the shots are fired. The applause began to die down. Liam, beaming, gestured to the technician's booth. "And now," he announced, his voice booming with satisfaction, "in a wonderful surprise she has put together herself, my wife has prepared a special tribute to celebrate our journey. Please, direct your attention to the screens." Liam's smile was a supernova of self-satisfaction. He gestured magnanimously towards the massive screens, the eager anticipation of the audience, a palpable force in the room. "My wife," he repeated, his voice full of pride, "has prepared a tribute." The screens flickered, but instead of the soft focus, sentimental montage he was expecting, a single, stark title card appeared in elegant, razor-sharp font. "Nexus Dynamics, a legacy of truth." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Liam's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of bewilderment. He glanced towards the tech booth, an angry question forming on his lips. But it was too late. From the front row, Elara rose. She did not move like a fragile woman, nor a scorned wife. She moved like a queen, claiming her throne. With a steady, unhurried gait, she ascended the side stairs to the stage, her simple gray dress a slash of reality against the artificial brightness. The room, which moments before had been ringing with applause, fell into a stunned, absolute silence. She walked to the secondary lectern, adjusted the microphone with a calm, deliberate hand, and looked out at the thousands of bewildered faces. Her eyes, magnified on the giant screens, were clear, cold, and completely devoid of fear. "Thank you, Liam, for that introduction," she began, her voice perfectly even, yet carrying an edge of polished steel that cut through the silence and reached every corner of the ballroom. "And thank you for this platform. You are right. This is a story about a journey. It's a story about faith, about sacrifice, and about a partnership. But I am here today to finally tell the truth of that partnership." Liam, frozen near the edge of the stage, was now staring at her, his face a mask of disbelief, turning rapidly to fury. Serena had gone rigid in her chair, a premonition of disaster dawning in her eyes. Alara clicked a small remote in her hand. The first slide appeared behind her, a sun-drenched photograph from their wedding day, the image of two happy, hopeful people. "Every great structure requires a solid foundation," Alara said, her voice a calm, narrative drone. "Ours was built on what I was led to believe was trust and fidelity." She clicked again. The wedding photo vanished, replaced by an audio file's waveform. A sound, clear as a bell, filled the auditorium. It was Liam's voice, low and intimate, whispering, "No one understands me like you do." Then Serena's voice, a breathy reply, "She doesn't see the real you, but I do." A collective gasp swept through the room. On screen, the camera feed cut to Serena's face, her skin the color of ash, her hand instinctively flying to the starlight sapphire at her throat. Alara clicked again. A new slide showed the jeweler's receipt for the necklace, displayed right next to a high-resolution photo of Serena wearing it at that very moment. The betrayal was no longer an accusation, it was a verified, public fact. But a simple betrayal of the heart, as painful as it is a private matter, Alara continued, her voice hardening. This story, however, is about business, because a partnership, after all, involves assets. Click. The screen was now filled with the damning emails between Liam and her sister, their casual cruelty projected 10 feet high. Phrases like her latest paranoid episode, "and we just need to manage her until the papers are signed," were highlighted in blood red. Click. Another audio file. This time, the recording from the final family dinner played. The audience listened, mesmerized and horrified, to the sounds of Serena's false sympathy and Liam's gentle, loving tone as they calmly discussed committing Alara to a mental institution. "It's for her own good," Liam's recorded voice echoed through the hall. "She needs rest." The hypocrisy was so profound it was suffocating. Liam was now shouting from the side of the stage, his face purple with rage, screaming, "Turn it off! Someone turn it off!" But the technicians in the booth, loyal to the massive fee Arthur had paid them, did not move. Alara was in complete control. Click. The fraudulent medical evaluation filled the screen. "To seize my assets, they needed a weapon," Alara explained, as if giving a lecture. "So they invented one. They hired a disgraced psychiatrist to declare me insane." A second document appeared beside the first, proof from the Medical Board of New York that Dr. Alistair Finch had his license permanently revoked 3 years prior for falsifying patient records. But the question remains, why? Alara's voice was relentless. Why this elaborate, cruel deception? Click. The screen shifted to the complex financial charts Arthur had prepared. They were simplified for the audience. Elegant, brutal arrows showing millions of dollars flowing from Nexus Dynamics accounts into a web of offshore shell corporations. Because this company, built on my family's legacy and the last dollar of my inheritance, became my husband's private bank. He was not just cheating on me. He has been cheating all of you. At the mention of theft, the board members jolted upright. The SEC agents exchanged a significant look and began to quietly make their way towards the aisles. The atmosphere in the room had transformed from confusion to shock, and now to a cold, simmering fury. The spectacle was no longer a family drama. It was a massive corporate crime, unveiled in real time. Liam, defeated and incoherent with rage, was being held back by 2 imposing men in dark suits who had seemingly appeared from nowhere. Just as the chaos threatened to boil over, the main doors of the ballroom swung open. Arthur Vance, flanked by the 2 senior board members he had allied with, walked in. He moved with the unhurried, implacable purpose of a man delivering a final verdict. Alara saw him, and with a final commanding gesture, she clicked her remote one last time, bringing up the seal of her father's estate. "And now," she announced, her voice ringing with finality, "a word from our founder." She yielded the lectern to Arthur, who placed a heavy, leather-bound document upon it. "For those of you who do not know me," he began, his old-school, authoritative voice commanding immediate silence, "my name is Arthur Vance. I was the personal attorney for the late Richard Hayes, and I am the executor of his will." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the stunned faces of the board. Richard was a man who believed in contingency plans. Arthur then explained the existence of the secret codicil, his words precise and legally devastating. He read the core clause aloud, his voice resonating with the weight of a death sentence. He then turned and looked directly at the sputtering, restrained figure of Liam Hayes. "Based on the irrefutable evidence presented here today of both marital infidelity and willful financial and emotional harm, you have triggered this clause. Effective this moment, Mr. Hayes, every share, every asset, and every title you hold within Nexus Dynamics is rendered null and void. By the last will and testament of Richard Hayes, you are no longer an officer of this company. You are no longer a shareholder. You are a trespasser. You have absolutely nothing. It was over." A single, collective roar of disbelief and outrage erupted from the crowd. Serena, with a final, pathetic whimper, had slumped over in her chair in a dead faint. Eleanor was a statue of pure, horrified shock. Reporters were scrambling, shouting questions, their cameras flashing like a violent electrical storm. In the center of the hurricane she had created, Ilara stood perfectly still. She looked past the chaos, past the ruin, and her eyes met Liam's. In his face, she saw the dawning, soul-destroying realization of his complete and utter annihilation. He was looking at a woman he had never known, a ghost who had risen from the grave he had dug for her to become his judge, jury, and executioner. And in her eyes, he saw no hatred, no triumph, no love. He saw only the cold, serene, and final closing of an account. The debt had been paid in full. The moment Arthur Vance's words landed, the fragile artifice of the corporate meeting shattered into a million pieces. The stunned silence was ripped apart by a single, primal scream of denial from Liam. It was not a word, but a sound of pure, narcissistic rage, the sound of a god being torn from his heaven. Chaos erupted, a flash flood of panic and morbid curiosity. The audience surged to its feet, a single roaring organism of shock and confusion. Photographers, smelling blood, scrambled towards the stage, their cameras flashing like automatic weapons, capturing the spectacular, instantaneous implosion of a king. Liam, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief and fury, lunged towards Ilara, his hands clawing as if to physically tear down the truth she had just erected. But he never reached her. The two security guards, Arthur's men, moved with swift, brutal efficiency, seizing his arms and restraining him. He fought like a cornered animal, his bespoke suit tearing at the seams, shouting obscenities, threats, and incoherent accusations. "She's lying. The woman is insane. I'll destroy you, Ilara. Do you hear me? I'll destroy you." His voice, once a tool of hypnotic charisma, was now a shrill, pathetic shriek that was swallowed by the rising din of the crowd. It was then that the two quiet observers from the SEC made their move, presenting their badges with calm authority, informing Liam's security detail that he was now a person of federal interest. The corporate coup had seamlessly transitioned into a criminal arrest. Across the room, the other half of the conspiracy had crumpled. Serena hadn't fainted from shock. She had collapsed under the sudden, crushing weight of public shame. Paramedics, who were always on standby for large corporate events, were now surrounding her. But the crowd's sympathy had curdled into contempt. They saw her not as a victim, but as a co-conspirator, a Lady Macbeth whose ambition had led her to this pathetic, prostrate ruin. Her name was already being linked to his, their treachery a single, ugly story. And in the front row, Eleanor Hayes sat as if she had been turned to stone. The fierce pride in her eyes had been replaced by a hollow, vacant horror. She watched her son, the golden boy she had worshipped, thrashing like a common criminal. She saw the name she had been so proud of being dragged through the deepest gutter imaginable. There was no defiance left in her, only the brittle, fragile shell of a woman who had bet everything on the wrong heir. She did not weep. She simply broke, silently, from the inside out. In the heart of this maelstrom, Ilara remained preternaturally calm. She had not moved. She watched the destruction she had unleashed with the detached focus of a physicist observing a successful, catastrophic experiment. The noise, the shouting, the flashing lights, it was all external. Inside, there was only a profound, echoing silence. The storm she had nurtured for so long had finally been set free, and it was even more powerful than she had imagined. As security escorted a still-screaming Liam and a stone-faced Eleanor from the ballroom, Arthur Vance and the two loyal board members joined Alara on stage. They formed a small, solid island in the swirling chaos. The power vacuum was absolute, and in that moment, every journalist, every investor, every remaining employee looked to her. They were all asking the same silent question: what now? Alara stepped back to the lectern. The simple act of her moving, of her reclaiming the center of power, sent a ripple of quiet through the room. "Today," she began, her voice cutting through the remaining noise, firm and clear and utterly in command. "You have all been witness to the painful, necessary airing of a deep-seated betrayal, both personal and corporate." She did not apologize for the chaos. She owned it. The era of deceit at Nexus Dynamics is over. Effective immediately, I am assuming control as the majority shareholder, as per the final testament of my father, Richard Hayes. Our first act will be one of radical transparency. Her eyes scanned the room, meeting the gazes of the shocked but attentive investors. We will be launching a full, independent forensic audit of the company's finances. We will cooperate fully with the Securities and Exchange Commission and any other relevant authorities. We will identify every dollar that was stolen, and we will work relentlessly to restore the integrity of this company, for our employees and for you, our shareholders. It was not a victory speech. It was a battle plan. It was the calm, decisive voice of a true leader stepping into the breach. The journalists were typing furiously, the headlines already writing themselves. Hayes High-Risk seizes control in shocking COUP. Liam Hayes accused of massive fraud. Wife's revenge rocks tech world. Later, in a private conference room high above the ruined ballroom, the adrenaline began to fade. The core of her new alliance, Arthur, and the two shaken but resolute board members sat with her. The reality of the day began to set in. "The market will be a bloodbath when it opens tomorrow," one of the board members said, his voice grim. "But your decisive action today? It might just save us from total collapse. You gave them a villain, but you also gave them a new leader." Arthur laid out the legal reality. Liam was in federal custody, his assets frozen. Serena, after being medically cleared, was taken in for questioning as a material witness and co-conspirator. The legal case against them was airtight. The combination of financial fraud and the conspiracy to falsely imprison her meant they would likely be facing years in prison. The empire was gone. Their vast wealth, so intricately tied to the fraudulent schemes, would be clawed back by federal authorities and shareholder lawsuits. They were left with nothing but their shame, their designer clothes, and their prison sentences. They had not just fallen from grace, they had been erased from the board entirely. When the others had left, Alara stood alone, looking out the window at the sprawling, indifferent city. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and bruised purple. She did not feel the triumphant elation she had once imagined. The victory was not sweet. It was necessary. Revenge, she was discovering, was not a fiery passion. It was a cold, meticulous, and lonely form of justice. It was the act of resetting a broken bone, excruciating, precise, and leaving a dull, lasting ache where the damage had once been. The war for her freedom was won, but the cost had been immense. Her family was a ruin, her past a lie, and the future was now a vast, broken empire that rested solely upon her shoulders. The silence in the room was absolute, the silence of an aftermath, the silence of a debt finally paid. 6 months passed. The seasons in New York turned, and with them, the fortunes of Nexus Dynamics. The name, once synonymous with scandal, was slowly becoming a case study in corporate resurrection. The penthouse, with its ghosts and panoramic views of a life that was a lie, had been sold, its contents liquidated. Ilara now lived in her father's renovated brownstone, a place of warm wood, worn books, and quiet integrity. She did not rule the company from an ivory tower, but from the boardroom on the 40th floor, a place she now commanded with a quiet, decisive authority that left no room for doubt. She was not the gentle, artistic girl Liam had married, nor the cold, vengeful strategist she had been forced to become. She was something new, a synthesis of the two, her father's empathy tempered by Arthur's pragmatism, her own resilience forged into a core of unshakable strength. The world of her enemies had shrunk to the size of their just deserts. Liam was in a federal penitentiary, his appeals exhausted, his name a permanent stain in the annals of corporate crime. Serena, having turned state's evidence for a reduced sentence, was now free, but she was a pariah, living in obscurity under a different name, her social and financial ruin absolute. Eleanor had vanished completely, retreating into a self-imposed exile, consumed by the shame of her son's spectacular downfall. Their chapter was over. Alara had thought so, at least, until the letter arrived. It came in a sterile, legal envelope, forwarded by Liam's appellate attorney. For a full day, she left it unopened on her desk, a final, unwanted ghost from a past she had worked so hard to bury. She had no interest in his excuses, his rage, or his pleas. But curiosity, that final, persistent human trait, won out. She slid it open one evening, a glass of wine by her side, the fire crackling in the hearth. The letter was not an apology. Liam was psychologically incapable of such a thing. It was a rambling, venomous screed of a narcissist, filled with self-pity and bitter accusations, blaming her, her father, and the world for his ruin. It was pathetic, and she was about to toss it into the fire when she saw the postscript, a single, final paragraph, written in a tighter, more furious scrawl. "I thought you should know," it read, "that you and I were not the only players in this game. We were not even the most important ones. We were simply pawns for your sister." He wrote that his lawyer, during the discovery process, had unearthed a recording Serena had tried to delete. A phone call she had made to a friend just days before the shareholder meeting. He had, with what must have been his last remaining funds, obtained a certified transcript. A copy was enclosed. Elara's hands were steady as she unfolded the single, flimsy page. It was a snapshot of pure, unadulterated poison. The transcript read, "Serena, laughing. He actually thinks this is our big victory. He's already picking out new jewelry for me. The fool. Friend, so you'll finally be the new Mrs. Hayes? Serena, please." Being his wife was never the prize. It was the consolation prize. The real prize is watching Elara's perfect world burn. Watching her face when she realizes her perfect husband and her perfect sister took it all away. He's just a tool, the most effective one I could find to finally tear her down. And if he gets caught in the fire when it all comes crashing down, honestly, that's even better. Then I'll be the only daughter left. Elara read the transcript twice, the words sinking in not with a shock of new pain, but with a profound, quiet, and final understanding. It was never about love for Liam. It was never about a lust for power or money. It was about her. All of it. The years of faked admiration, the calculated seduction, the monstrous plot, it was all born from the simple, black-hearted jealousy of a girl who had forever lived in a shadow of her own making. Liam, the great titan, the master manipulator, had been just as much her pawn as Elara had been his victim. His grand betrayal was merely a footnote in a much older, sadder story of sibling rivalry. A slow, cool wave of something akin to pity washed over Elara. They were not the formidable, evil masterminds she had fought. They were just two broken, greedy people who had found each other in the dark, each thinking they were using the other, only to end up destroying themselves. She walked to the fireplace and dropped both Liam's bitter letter and Serena's poisonous confession into the flames. She watched as the paper curled, blackened, and turned to weightless, glowing ash, disappearing up the chimney and into the night sky. In that moment, the last anchor to her past was severed. She was not just free from them, she was free from the story they had written for her. The rage that had sustained her was gone, leaving behind not emptiness, but a clean, quiet space to build something new, something that was entirely her own. Never underestimate the quiet person, the one who has seen too much, heard too much, and endured too much. Their silence is not an absence of strength, it is the patient gathering of it. And when they finally decide that enough is enough, they will not simply close the book on the past. They will burn the entire library down to its foundations and build a new one in their own name on the scorched earth. Revenge, in the end, is not about destruction. It is a violent, necessary act of restoration, of reclaiming your truth and seizing control of your own story. Thank you for listening. I am GIA.EIT1HUS, and I will see you in the next chapter.